Hello, everybody. Welcome into the Apples and Ginos Fantasy Hockey Podcast. My name is Nate Niblink. I'm the creator of Apples and Ginos, originator of the Zero G Draft Strategy. And this podcast, my guest and I are going to dig on fantasy hockey strategy and take a look back at our drafts in the Fantasy Puck Content Creators League. Let's get it. And my guest for this episode is none other than Chris Charlton from Fantasy Puck. Chris, Blake has been monopolizing all of your time when it comes to Apples and Ginos, but I did a little end around and I got to you before he did this offseason, so we finally got some time together here.
Man, I was gonna say it's such a different dynamic with Blake. It's such a more extravagant intro. He's making some weird noises and being way too over enthusiastic. Blake, if you're watching, love you, miss you, man. But Nate's got me for tonight, so you're missing out right now.
That's the plan. So yeah, we are gonna get into some strategy talk. It is the off season after all. We still got lots of content coming out, but I think this is as good a time as any to dig in on some of the finer points of strategy. So I took some time, put together some points that might give us at least a jumping off point for us to talk through some strategy. So we're going to jump in first to some draft kind of stuff, and then kind of at the midway point, we'll dive into our drafts in the Fantasy Puck Content Creators League from last year and talk about our specific drafts and what may have gone right or gone wrong, as the case may be. And then we'll close it out with a little bit more stuff. But I think we should just go ahead and jump in with number one here. So let's start here. What do you think, Chris? What's the most important thing for a first-time fantasy manager to get a handle on? If they're coming into fantasy brand new 2025-26, what would you recommend them start with?
I gave this one some thought actually because I always love talking to new fantasy, specifically fantasy hockey fans and advocates and people that want to get into it more, especially in the sport of hockey. It's always something that you're trying to promote just because you just love it so much that you want other people to feel that joy. And when you create content around it, you actually it's so fulfilling to see a lot of new people kind of come in and give you a sense of something new and exciting where it's I have no idea what you're talking about when you say shooting percentage.
Yeah.
And I'm just wait a second, hold on. I think for me, there's kind of a couple points, but I think the most important overall and the way that we kind of try to guide people that are relatively new to fantasy hockey is understand your league settings first and foremost. That's going to tell you how to properly evaluate players, which in my opinion is one of the more prominent things when it comes to fantasy hockey is understanding the valuation of players. And your league settings are basically going to tell you who's good in this format. It's do you count hits in your league? That completely changes the dynamic in terms of who you should be looking at drafting. Mm-hmm. How many goalie categories are there compared to player categories, right? It's all these little nuances. I think the thing that I dislike the most about fantasy hockey is it's not like fantasy football where it's one or two set formats, right? You've got so much, almost too much customizable settings in terms of categories and values for each category. So I think if it was streamlined a little bit more, it would be more readily available for people to jump into and enjoy. But it's kind of the way it is, the nature of the beast in a sense. Mm-hmm. And I think that once you truly understand your league settings, you'll get a good grasp. And then after that, I would just say to if you're really passionate about it, absorb as much information as possible. I remember when we first started playing or first started creating content over at Fantasy Puck, it's the amount of time and effort we put into just evaluating players based off of data is just way too many hours at that point. Yeah. So doing the research and also just I watch your players play hockey, and that's the most fun part in my opinion. Mm-hmm. Is you're in a tight week against your buddy and you see Austin Matthews rip a hat trick and you're just over the moon about it, right? That's mm-hmm. what makes it so fun and enjoyable. So those would kind of be a couple.
Yeah. I think probably most of the questions that we've got here, there won't be a quote unquote correct answer, but I think for this one, league settings, you gotta understand what that means, especially for player evaluation, right? That's the toughest part of any new league. Even, yeah, whatever game you're playing, right? What are the rules? How do I get from point A to point B? What moves me more towards the top of the pile versus the bottom of the pile?
Yeah.
And league settings is how you're going to get there. And yeah, it's kind of the best and the worst thing about fantasy hockey that we don't have these kind of set regulated categories or point settings for points leagues. But at the same time, it does allow us to have these kind of customizable things where we can all kind of choose what we want to do, and that's also kind of fun. So I see it both ways there. It's a good time regardless for anybody who's new, and yeah, I think we're both in favor of new people finding fantasy hockey and getting
Always.
into it. Let's move on to the next one here. What's the difference between a good fantasy manager and a great one? So somebody who's probably been playing for a few years at this point, they've got a handle. They're listening to Apples and Ginos. They're watching Fantasy Puck videos on the regular. They've got a good idea of what's going on, but they still aren't winning their league, or they've started to play in some better leagues than they're used to, and they're finding a new level of competition, and they're not quite sure how to take the next step. What do you think there?
So if step one in your first question is like, okay, what's the base level of understanding? It's like, okay, understanding your league, the league settings, the valuation of players that I kind of touched on. But I think the one step that I see that makes, great fantasy hockey managers is they understand their opponents. I think a lot of the time when you play in leagues year after year, you start to see and understand tendencies in terms of what people like to do in certain situations in the draft, like what their philosophy is on, like, based off the league settings. Is this something that, they tend to skew more towards drafting defensemen early versus goaltending? They tend to, skew towards targeting specific categories. And once you understand, like, the way that they draft, you get an interpretation of, where can I find value later in the draft? Could I wait on a defenseman for a couple rounds because I know a lot of these guys like love to take goalies? Could I, wait or do I know I have to take a goalie within like the first 6-7 rounds? Otherwise, they're all going to be gone by round 8. And so, like, the great fantasy hockey managers not only understand how their opponents draft, but then on top of that, they understand how they trade, and they understand how their opponent values players, right? Like in one of my leagues, there's always opportunity to find these kind of like hot-headed or panicky players. I'll use for lack of a better term, that are just like, my guy hasn't done anything in 2 weeks. Like, I'm open to moving him. And so you combine that with your understanding of like data research and like player evaluation, and you can get to a point where you're just able to get great value off of trades on top of that with like buy lows and sell highs, as well as just like finding opportunities to realize, this guy's in a terrible position because 3 out of the 4 defensemen that he drafted are terrible right now. He needs a defenseman. I now have leverage in this trade opportunity. So I think the great fantasy hockey managers understand how to, like, they understand their opponents at a very high level, and even to the point where like they're able to join leagues and then just pick up on tendencies of what people do, right?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I definitely agree. There are some leagues, especially if you've been in the league with the same people for a longer amount of time, or you've had a chance to pick up on what they've done in multiple drafts now, and you're kind of getting the theme of what they're about. There's definitely a chance to, like, even within the draft itself, right? To take a look and say, okay, I'm at the 11th spot. I've got the 11th pick in this round, the second pick next round. They're on the turn, so they've got 2 picks in between my 2 picks here. But based on what you know about that person and their draft tendencies, what you've seen in the past, you might actually have a pretty good idea of what they're looking to do, and you might be able to get both of the players that you want. Whereas if you don't have that knowledge and you're not applying it, you might kind of panic pick one of the players and then not get the guys that you want to have there. So there's definitely little edges like that you can get from evaluating your opponents correctly, not only in the draft but also in season, like you mentioned. For myself, the one thing I was thinking of here was just like, I think there's a lot of people that can get to good, and it's really tough to get to great. But I think it is really about like the micro edges at the highest level. I'm playing in some pretty high level leagues against some people who eat, sleep, and breathe this stuff the same way we do, and it is like the 3 a.m. waiver run sometimes that you got to get up for if you want that guy. If
Don't
you're
even
like,
get me started on that, man. Like there was a point last year in the Creator League where, I thought both of you guys just at Apple and Ginos had like an automated system that was just like AI generated that just would pick up players that you had pre-selected. I was dumbfounded the amount of times I was getting notifications at 3 o'clock in the morning about like you streaming like, I don't know, like Castle Ring or something, and I was just losing my mind. I'm like, there's no way this guy's that dialed.
Yeah, unfortunately, I can confirm that that's me every single time clicking the button.
That's
at
I
3
don't know
a.m.
what I don't know what I think about that anymore.
Yeah, I don't think it's necessary every single time. I've gotten into a habit of it, so I'm just doing it but there are definitely some weeks where I'm like, oh yeah, this guy, if I wait, like he's not going to be there at 6:15 when my alarm goes off. So
especially those playoff weeks too, man. It's like
yeah.
you're trying to look at guys that you need to pick up like 2 weeks in advance sometimes.
Yep, for sure. So yeah, that kind of stuff, I keep notifications on for some really big names on Twitter, like Elliot Friedman on Twitter.
Yeah, Freed for sure is just like the number one guy. I think if you're into fantasy hockey and you play it at like almost I'll call it a competitive level. Like last year's a great example. Have his notifications on. He tweets out that it was Mackenzie Blackwood got traded to the Abs, picked him up, and like he was a league winner after that. So
yeah, huge one, huge example from last year. And yeah, like all those kind of little things that some people might think like that's like a little extreme.
Yeah.
But if you're doing all of those things consistently, like they do add up, especially over the course of the season. You get to the playoffs and maybe anything can happen in one given week, but to get you to the playoffs as consistently as you want to be, then you might have to consider doing something you might consider a little bit extreme to get those results. All right. Let's move on to the next one here. If you had to give just one draft tip to someone comes to you and says, I have a draft in 5 minutes, I can only take in one thing. What are you giving them? What's your number one absolute best?
I'm going to let you start this time just because I'm curious. I'm curious what you think your number one tip is to somebody that's like...
Well, I don't think I'm going to be surprising anyone here, but for me it is going to be 0G. Just send those goalies back to the bottom of the list, take them down at the end, turn on your Elliot Friedman notifications, pick up Mackenzie Blackwood, ride him to the end, do what you got to do. But that is the number one thing. Like literally, that is the thing that I tell people if they ask me, and I do get DMs like that a fair bit.
I think... I'm going to give you two answers. I'm going to cheat on one. My initial answer was understand that you're never going to be right 100% of the time, and that's kind of like a philosophy thing. Like it's not an actual tip, but at the end of the day, it's like there's been so many times I've gone back in past drafts and being like, if only I picked Zach Werenski in the 6th round before. It's going to drive you crazy, and you're going to like kind of get discouraged about it. But that's not really a tip. I think if there's one actual like strategy tip that I would play into is like play and kind of really accept scarcity for what it is. And what I mean by that is like, okay, like centers are a great example. There's so many centers on a year-to-year basis that run so deep into the 8th, 9th, 10th rounds, like the Bo Horvats, like even Tavares recently. You've got like Kadri going in like rounds 9, 10 that just hold so much value, and you can wait on centers a lot of the time where defense, like there's a huge gap between these guys that can get you over 60 points as defensemen, and like kind of the same thing with forwards nowadays. The scale is a little bit different, but it's like you can get a 60-point forward deep in your draft if you want to. But it's like the scarcity of waiting, and this kind of goes back to like your league settings, but understanding that you can wait on a certain position because there's just so much available to you that it's like it doesn't matter whether you're right on Wyatt Johnson in like round 4 and he breaks out. It's like I'm getting Nazem Kadri 4 rounds later, and I'm holding like 80% of that value through compared to like a Wyatt Johnson 4 rounds before. So,
Yeah.
like just understanding that like scarcity is a thing and it exists for a reason, and you need to play into it.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely agree with that point. I think it is becoming even more pronounced nowadays. Like Blake and I have talked about this a little bit, but now we're starting to see teams toy with the five forward setup on the power play even more than before. You see a lot of it in Toronto this past year. You saw a lot of it in LA. They ran it through the playoffs consistently. Um, yeah, there's multiple teams that are trying it. Philadelphia tried it at the end of last year. I don't think anybody was paying attention to Philadelphia's power play setups at the end of last year, but they
Uh,
were running it out there too.
Man, they
So
they should have been trying everything about like
yeah,
2 months into the season. They were at like 15%. I think they finished at last year.
yeah, yeah.
Brutal.
So, but what that effectively does, right, is it just takes another couple defensemen off or lowers them down the board in terms of their value for fantasy because they're not getting those power play points. We're not finding those later round guys who are getting the power play deployment, and that in return pushes up the upper tier defensemen even more valuable than they have been in years past. And you're gonna see it this year. I think it's gonna be a pretty weird year, to be honest, for defensemen. You're gonna
Yeah,
get
like the power play one guys are just so like just locked in. Like you know
yeah,
who's where almost in every single facet across every team. So it's like these are the guys that people always tend to jump at. And the guys that like split power play versus like have a full 5 set power play is it's going to be interesting to see like how many teams go to a 5 forward stack
hmm
and how that affects like defensemen across the board.
absolutely. All right, next one. How do you approach the draft in every league? What's the same and what's different? So obviously, league settings differ league to league. You might have a categories league, hero points league there. What kind of stays the same about how you're approaching a draft and what might be different?
I think where things stay the same for me is very much a lot of the things that I've kind of touched on already is like, I understand the league that I'm in, who I'm playing against. I understand like who's valuable within the league, the scarcity of these players. But I think it's just more so like as a top down level, like my takes generally don't change too much across the board. Like if I think Dylan Gunther's going to score 40 goals next year, like that opinion stays true across every league. And whether it's categories, whether it's points leagues, it's like if you think a guy is really going to break out and have like a true standout season and just really set himself apart, like I'm looking to draft that guy across like every single league. I don't think that ever changes for me. Where I do say it changes for me on like a draft to draft basis. It's probably relative to how competitive the league is.
Okay.
I play in, I'll call it my main league for lack of a better term, but essentially it's a $100 buy-in league. It's a keeper. You get the player for 3 total years, so you draft the player and then you get to keep them for 2 extra years. As well as it's a massive categories league. So goals, assists, power play points, shots, hits, blocks, pims, and face-offs for the forwards. And then the goaltenders are wins, save percentage, saves, and goals against average. So understanding that like number one is $100 buy-in league. Number two, the guys that I play with are all super competitive hockey nerds that just eat, sleep, breathe fantasy hockey. And it's a keeper league on top of that. Like I'm doing like a 2 to 3 year window when I plan for teams almost because of the contracts that I have, because of the keepers that I have, who's available the next draft, who got kept that was different from what I anticipated this year. Like it's gotten to the point where in that league specifically, and I don't mind airing this out now because I've won back to back in the past 2 years. So I'm kind of just like
Right.
kicking my feet up at this point.
Nice.
But it's got to the point where I'm now predicting who's going to be available in the first round for the year after this upcoming draft, right? Which is like some people hear that and it's like, well, how do you do that? And it's because I can see the contracts of the players who's going to be available, like when the big draft is, where you see the McDavids, the Matthews, the McKinnons come up. It's like, the offset kind of drafts where it's like, okay, past is actually available in this draft versus like the main one. So again, it depends on like the level of like passion, I guess, for lack of a better term, that I have for these leagues.
Yeah.
And the time and effort that I spend doing it. Like this is my main league is just something that I'm always tuned into, I'm always dialed on, and like that's usually my number one priority every year.
Yeah. That's awesome. Yeah, it definitely does lend a little bit of a different air to it depending on what's at stake, and if you know you're going to have to face your buddies at the bar every week and they're going to be telling you about how bad your week was in fantasy hockey. So I see that for sure. Yeah, for me, just approaching the draft, my general approach is the same. I start with my projection set. That's kind of my baseline for where I'm getting myself looking at things. Obviously, I modify that depending on whatever the settings of the league are, categories or points, whatever the point settings are. Start building in some value over replacement calculations, and we'll talk about that in a minute. And that's kind of like my base set. Typically, in the last couple of years, I've actually just like put defensemen in one like spreadsheet and the forwards in a whole other spreadsheet and goalies in another spreadsheet and just like totally separated them and not tried to keep them all together, because to some extent I feel like you're building different things when you're building your forward group versus building your defense group versus building out your goalies. So I've kind of liked just like the mental separation of that. It's kind of just more a preference thing, I think. I don't think you have to do that by any stretch, but that's one thing I have kind of changed in the last couple of years. The one league that was pretty different for me this past year, the Keeping Carlson guys, they run the Cupful, and it's a huge tiered system. Really, really well done. Really good job those guys do with that league. And I've made it up to the top tier of that league, and the top tier in that league, it's a 16-team league, so it's pretty deep. It's two center, two left wing, two right wing, 4D, two skater positions, and then two goalies, four bench. So yeah, it's pretty deep. The streamers are pretty bad for all the throughout the whole year, so you're not getting much
Oh
value off
God,
the
you must
waiver.
just hate that league then. Like
Yeah, it's difficult for sure. It's different, and it's definitely more difficult. But what I did for that one specifically was when I was doing kind of all my analysis, and it's an auction draft, so
oh
it's
God.
totally different.
Oh
Yeah,
God.
yeah.
That's actually the one format that I haven't done. And I would
Hmm.
be so curious to just to like in like a vacuum understand what that process looks like. Like do you have a spreadsheet beside you that's like you probably have some type of like valuation where it's like, okay, this player's worth like $5, this player's worth, whatever. And it's like, but like how often are you making the decision to like overbid for someone versus underbid for someone?
Yeah. Yeah, that is a huge consideration in the moment, and it's not easy to do. I was able to do it relatively well last year, but I'm not sure how well I'll be able to repeat that this year. We'll have to see. Basically, you can kind of view it as everybody has the same amount of budget to start, right? So you can multiply the budget by the number of teams. You say, okay, this is a total amount of dollars. And then what I did was I went back and looked at last year's stats, and using those point settings, basically I could figure out how many dollars per fantasy point you would have, right? And then using my projections, I'm now building.
DPFP is a crazy abbreviation for
Yeah, that
that.
is
Dollars
pretty
per
out there.
fantasy point.
That is pretty out there for sure. And because it was 16 team, I actually started to look at the off night factors a lot more, because I figured that I would really want to be focused on having really good decor, because in 16 team times four defenseman slots, I
Yeah,
actually
that's
wanted
gets
to
really scarce.
have really strong defense, and so I wanted to have defense that had off nights so that I wouldn't be, overcrowded on defense, even though I wanted to have five or six guys that were pretty strong on defense that I felt like I could hold all year. Yeah, I worked in a little adjustment for multi-positional factors as well, just so I wouldn't have as much, yeah, getting like stuck with, four right wing only guys or something like that. So yeah,
Yeah, I think that's always a good takeaway. Like the multi-position guys can factor in so much. Like it's actually
yeah,
incredibly significant in the main league to reference it again because we count face-offs. The guys that are
right,
like dual position or like I don't know. Brady Kachuk is just an absolute mutant in that league because he'll
yeah,
take like 150 face-offs on top of 300 shots, 300 hits, and then he's like one of the league leaders in PIMS every year. And I ended up drafting him when I first came into the league, and I got him like eighth overall or something ridiculous. Like he should be like a top three player in this. Like he might
yeah,
be better than McDavid in this format just because you count Pims.
right,
But there's just guys like that exist. Like that have dual eligibility that are just like disgusting in the face-off dot that you like look to target every single year. So there's so many of these like little nuances from like different like draft settings, and like the whole auction thing is just so wild to me that I think my biggest gripe with it is that like drafts are long enough as it is, but if you have like a constant auction going off and you're sitting there for like 4 hours, I would just be like, I don't care at that point.
Yeah, it is a time investment, that's for sure, especially with 16 teams. Yeah, it was a lot.
16 is wild.
All right, let's move on to the next one. So I hinted at it before, but you actually kind of hinted at this too when you're talking about centers and the scarcity factor here. So basically what that is value over replacement analysis. And the question is, do you include any of that analysis in your drafting decisions? Sounds like you do. Do you formalize that somehow for yourself? Like, is there something more than just, in general, I'd like to fade centers and I'd like to take defensemen early, or is there something a little more formal than that, or what does that look like in practicality for you?
So I've actually played around with this a bit in the past, and I'll make reference to our FPPL league, which we do with our subscribers and Patreon members. And something that we always preach over at Fantasy Puck is always like prioritize high-end defensemen, always prioritize power play one defenseman, because like finding these guys that like having good D, in our opinion, and the way that we kind of push our narrative is having good D is better than having good forwards, because there's so much available in terms of forwards, especially on like the waiver wire halfway through the season. It's like there's so many options and so many guys that you don't even think of drafting that ends up being like a league winner. Like Carver Kell's a great example. Like he's like a deep guy that you could have gotten like super late last year.
Yeah.
And you're just able to like pick up a guy like that off the waiver wire, but you're never under a circumstance of picking up a power play one defenseman off unless there's an injury that's like crazy significant. But even then, like I said, there's just, it's less of a determining factor in our opinion to like go forward versus defenseman. So what ended up happening was like by doing all these mock drafts every year on our channel and like getting guys involved, and whether it's like on stream or whether it's, you know, just kind of offline, and guys are just like hanging around, like who wants to jump into a mock, posting links in our Discord. There was this like precedent that was set that like defensemen were going off the board crazy early. Like I think in my league, I ended up taking Evan Bouchard with my second pick because I had been pressured into thinking that like D are flying off the board in the first 3 rounds. I've seen it through like every mock draft. Like you've got guys like Sergachev that are gone by like round 4. And it's just because like the for whatever reason, the people, and again, it's going back to like understanding the league that you drafted. But like objectively, like Evan Bouchard should never be a second round pick, right? And so it got me into the situation where I wanted to make sure that I had an elite power play one defenseman early, and then I could kind of punt that a little bit and then fill in like as the draft went on.
Yep.
And it actually got me into a bit of trouble, because then what ended up happening was that I ended up missing on, God, it was like probably 3-4 rounds in a row. Like I think I went like Zibanejad into, you know, some other guy, and then finished off with like Lindholm with just like 3 round span. And it ended up like hurting me so much that I didn't get another like high end forward, because I was kind of at like the tail end of the draft.
Yeah.
That it hurt me because I played into this narrative of like D going early. So I don't typically operate that way. I do something very similar to you, where I sort my forwards, my defense, my goaltending. I just have that on a separate sheet. If I'm looking to take a forward, I'm looking to take a forward at this spot. I'm not saying like, okay, it kind of depends, because like sometimes there's just defensemen that are available that shouldn't be available, or there's forwards that are available that shouldn't be available. And I'm not ever condoning going like forward defenseman, but
Right.
it kind of depends on the outlook of your team, and to your point, like the position scarcity that you have. And it's something that you actually reference a bunch of times in the creators draft when you were live streaming, because I'd watched it back. And you're like, I'm worried that I don't have any right wingers, and it's like round 8, and then you go like, I think it was like Brian Rust into some other guy like back to back. Like it was a couple picks where I was like, you know, like you're playing based off of getting a certain position, which I don't think that's where my philosophy lies a lot of the time. I think it's just purely value based. And that's, in my opinion, like it's how you win draft. It's like the first two rounds can decide your fate if you make mistakes,
Hmm.
but you win drafts in the mid to late rounds by getting these great value picks. Like I'll reference Nazem Kadri again. Like you're getting like Nazem Kadri round 10. It's like he's providing a ton of value for you, and like these are pieces that you're able to trade later on, and that's why
Yeah.
part of the philosophy that I have involves like taking shots on guys that I think are just going to pop and explode, like especially later in the drafts where you're swinging for the fences, because there's just so much turnover every year on the waiver wire in general
Yeah.
that it's like it's you look at drafts, and unless like guys are falling, like Zach Rins, he's a great example. Last year, like you get him like round 8, he was a league winner. Phil Forsberg the year before, and this is why like we do all these videos, because we identify like these guys like drastically outside of his ADP range based off of what he provides.
Yeah.
So it's like finding the value pieces are what's most important to me, but I guess that's kind of VORP in and of itself.
Yeah.
I don't think I ever have a priority of being like, I want this defenseman over this forward.
Right.
It's more so it's like, do I see value in this pick, or do I think this guy like has breakout potential or like a higher ceiling, for example? And you'll see it a lot of the time. Like we'll reference the video a couple times where you make some comments where you absolutely rip me because you're like, this guy doesn't do well in this format, and then I'm like, I'm looking at that pick and I'm like, that pick was a home run.
Yeah.
So and that like that just happens sometimes, man. Like I go back to what I said earlier. It's like you're not going to be right 100% of the time, but it's like being able to find value that you think is good value is what matters the most, in at least in my philosophy.
Yeah. No, I agree with all that. Yeah, I think doing like a formal VORP analysis, like doing it the way I talked about, where you're like trying to figure out exactly to the fantasy point over replacement, how good is this guy? And that can be a way for people who feel like they don't have a good idea of where this defenseman should go versus this forward. If you're feeling uncomfortable about that, then VORP is actually a really great tool just to like kind of level set that for yourself and say, okay, so, this guy is the 5th defenseman off the board, and I think he'll score, in this format, 1 fantasy point more than a replacement level defenseman. And this forward, who the ADP is right beside this defenseman, but his VORP is actually 2 fantasy points more than the replacement level forward. That can be like just like a kind of a mental check that you can do for yourself to say, okay, actually this looks like a pretty big difference between these two players, and that can be a way to just kind of value between positions for people, especially people who are a little bit newer or don't quite feel like they don't have the tool set to identify that kind of value for themselves. Maybe for you and I, because we're doing all these mock drafts and we're doing all these actual drafts constantly, that we feel like we find these pockets kind of a little bit more naturally. It's a bit more intuitive. I think that makes sense. And definitely a lot of our listeners and our viewers are doing the same. So there are definitely a lot of people out there that do this a little bit more intuitively, just with reps, right?
Yeah, having a projection sheet if you're a new player is game changing for you, because then you get to like you may not fully understand like why it's relevant, but it helps you in the spots where you just don't know where to go. Mm-hmm. Right. And this is why like there's so many of these projection sheets that exist and that are like, well renowned, like yours, for example. I'll loop mine in there, for example. Like it's successful to a certain degree, but I hate to tell you this, Nate, but they're not always right. It's not always like a 1-to-1. It's not always like Raquel is going to outscore Dylan Gunther, just because he gets an extra 50 to 60 hits. It's like sometimes that like it doesn't happen. It's hard to account for things like breakouts. It's hard to understand like just the process and the randomness to it, right? So that's why I don't like it's helpful, but at the same time it goes back to what I was kind of alluding to. It's like if I have a take on a guy, like I might bump him in my projection just so that he's like active on my list as like a priority, not because like I actually think he's going to get, like Dylan Gunther's going to score like 56 goals next year, but do I think he can score 40? Yeah. Do I think he can like hit 45 on like an insane season playing with Clayton Keller the entire time? Yeah, like he's talented enough to do that. I love Dylan Gunther, if you couldn't already tell.
It's coming across.
Yeah. So it's like it helps. I'm not saying like be religious towards it by any means, but like understand that there's a reason why these sheets are successful, and using VORP is like kind of spoken for itself over time.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that. And I agree too that, you know, you don't have to go one by one, line by line down the VORP sheet
For
and
sure.
just take the next name. You want to think about your roster construction, what you're doing throughout the draft. You want to think about, you know, I only have a left wing here and I have a right wing here. It would be kind of nice if I got a guy with left wing and right wing eligibility, and that could be a tiebreaker between a few guys who have similar
Yeah.
VORP in your next pick. Also, like what you're talking about with Genther, like what is the ceiling scenario for this player? I think that's a thing that a lot of people are not really considering a lot of the time, and something Blake and I are really trying to hammer in our projection series is what are the, not just the median projection, not just like the single number that Blake and I get to put on our sheets and put out to the world and get judged on, but what is also the range of outcomes for this player, right? Like what happens if the new coach in town doesn't really like them, and that's a real possibility. What happens to them then? Are they efficient enough to produce in lower minutes? Or what's the best case scenario? They, you know, they get more minutes than ever before and they're a real breakout player. What does that actually look like? What's the high end outcome that they could potentially hit if everything breaks right for them? And that's different for every player in every situation. And so that's a huge part of it as well. It's not just about the single number on the spreadsheet at the end of the day. It's also about taking the appropriate amount of risk at different points in the draft to hit on some of those high end outcomes.
Yeah, I think you need a good blend. Like to your guys' point, it's like there's times where you could go through about a player and you could explore like 6 or 7 different circumstances and outcomes. But you can go all day about that stuff, right? And
Yeah.
it's like you could have a differing opinion on Dylan Genther, and I think that the thing I love most about projection sheets is it kind of level sets you a little bit. It's like, okay, like this is saying based off of a historic, proven, accurate data source that, you know, he lives anywhere between this range and this range based off like a yearly average, given this amount of ice time and this amount of opportunity. And it's like, okay, yeah, you could play into that where it's like, for example, I might bump a guy because I think he's going to get like line 1 minutes instead of like, I'll use Adam Fantilli, for example. Like I was super high on him last year.
Same.
Like there is no way that this guy isn't the number 1 center in Columbus. And then next thing you know, like Sean Monahan's over a point a game. And I'm just like, my brain is melting in front of me. And then Monahan gets injured, and then like Fantilli comes back to life about like 4 months into the season after I've given up hope on him. And I'm just like, it's just like these little things that happen where it's just like you can never predict them. It's the element of randomness. But at the same time, it's like if you looked at a spreadsheet and you were like, yes, he still projects here given his minutes, you get like a level, you get a bar level in terms of like what you can expect out of him, which I love because it removes the element of like emotion, which you know is key in order to being successful. Because like, for example, like, you know, I wasn't high on Elias Lindholm compared to some of my other fantasy puck counterparts last year. And I was questioning the projection. I'm like, why is he like up here for like 60 points, 70 points? It's like, oh, like we bumped his minutes. He's going to be line 1 in Boston. He's going to play with Pasternak. Like tick, tick, tick. All these things make a ton of sense. Power play 1 time. Has a history of scoring 40 goals at one point. Right. And then like all of a sudden he's a dud. And it's just like, well, my like bias was like, I don't think he's that bad. But then their bias was like, I think he's this good. And then it was kind of like this convincing factor that came into my mind where I was like, you know what, they're like, Mike's right, like Noah's right, Don's right, like this makes a ton of sense, it checks a lot of the boxes. I'm now going to change my bias about him. But the data always is kind of what level sets things for me.
Yep. Love that. All right, let's talk about this draft now. I pulled up
You got the screenshots. I love this.
I got the screenshots so we can kind of walk it through. I want to know which picks I was hating on your draft here. So
I don't know if you want to necessarily pull it up. I linked the YouTube video that you guys have
nice.
as well as the timestamps for where you kind of talk about it. So I would love to get like your reaction to your own take on, and they're all my picks selfishly. Like I'm like, I just need to hear Nate like kind of eat his words a little bit here.
All right. Okay, so what did we get? Kyle Connor was one.
Let's start there, and then we can kind of well, it's up to you. Like we can look at things from like a top down, or when we get to these players, we can pull those up, or whatever is easiest for you. Whatever
right.
Blake decides to edit and post on this.
We'll leave it up to him. Now, why don't you? I'll start looking at that, and you talk through the first few picks of your draft here.
Okay, I'm at the 2 spot here, so my life is pretty easy for the first couple rounds. Like there isn't too much deliberation on Nathan McKinnon into Jason Robertson. J Rob's an interesting character. I'll talk about him. Like we've kind of seen like a slow regression from him over the last couple seasons from that like standout 45 goal 100 point season that he had. And I honestly think the reason is because of Wyatt Johnston. Like I think he's cannibalizing him a little bit, and he's kind of taking like the shot rate that we've seen from J Rob because his shots have kind of dropped. But I looked at it in last year's context of, he's coming off like a down year, like he's talented enough to score 40 plus, like he definitely has that in his repertoire. We saw his shot rate dive down a little bit. You're getting him at great value. He was a former first round pick the year before that, or like hovered around like the 11-12 spot. But I think at pick 23, like if for a guy that you're betting on getting 100 points, and I looked at my options there and I was like, given the goal scoring upside as well as the point total upside on top of that, and the fact that he's got a pretty decent shot volume, and I was just anticipating a better bounce back given some of the second round options there. I loved your Philip Forsberg pick at 16. I think you mentioned over the fact that, like he's just like probably like your highest rated player because of the shot and hit combo. Like it's so elite. He projects so well every single year. Can get you like 350 shots and then 150 hits on top of that while scoring, 45 of the sickest goals that the NHL has ever seen, because he's honestly like one of the most underrated guys in terms of skill, I think I don't know if that's a hot take or not, but he's so nasty. Love the guy. And I have a soft spot for Nashville for whatever reason, because Roman Josi is one of my favorite players, simply because of fantasy. Fun fact. But, top 2 picks, I think, are easy for the both of us here. Kaprizov, you got at 9. I think, I understand why, but I think when I was doing my tier list for the beginning of that year, I left him out of S for the injury concern. I think my S tier for wingers was Kucherov, Pasternak, Rantanen, Brady, Matthew, and there might have been one more, but I think I explicitly left Kaprizov out and being like, look, like he's very similar to Jack Hughes. It's like until he shows that he can stay healthy for more than 65, 70 games a season, he's not going to hold value throughout the entire year. It's like some guys are actually just injury prone, and it's kind of this weird circumstance of it's like the first pick of your draft. I probably want to take someone a little bit safer, or at least that I know is going to like replicate similar value. I don't know who went at 8. I don't know who went at 9. But I think I was a little bit hesitant of Kaprizov. Now, if I knew Kaprizov was playing, 82 games, he's easily hitting 120 points. He's in that Kucherov sphere, right? But again, like at 9, I don't think it's a bad pick by any means. Like I'm not trying to rip on you.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I got it up here. So I took Kaprizov at 9. Brady went 1 pick before to Don, actually. Mikko Rantanen went.
Brady.
Mikko Rantanen went right after. Jack Hughes, Matthew Tkachuk, Roman Josi, JT Miller, Evan Bouchard went 2-3, and then I took Forsberg at 2-4. I mean, like, I think it was just a little bit as well, just like a bad back end of the first round, like for the run out for all of those players.
Oh, yeah.
Like Kaprizov, Hughes, and Tkachuk all injured. Rantanen gets traded and like can't play basically in Carolina. So yeah, it was just kind of being in that section of the draft. I don't know that there was a correct decision to make there. Kaprizov was great when he was healthy. He did come back. He just didn't come back in time for fantasy. So yeah, I think that this is it's an interesting spot regardless. For myself, I've said it before here, I don't factor injuries in too much. I think it's usually, and yeah, the first round obviously is maybe a different story, but usually you're getting a discount on the injury narrative to start, and that usually more than makes up for any risk that you're taking on, in my mind. And by and large, we're really bad at predicting injuries for players year over year. Eric Carlson was a huge injury risk and then immediately popped off for his 100-point season. Evgeny Malkin was a huge injury risk and then went back-to-back 82-game seasons. I haven't done a formal study on it, but for myself, I haven't really used injury narratives to like dissuade me from taking a player that I feel really strongly about. I did feel really strongly about Kaprizov having the highest ceiling of all the guys that were on the board there, and I
Like
think that
over Jack Hughes as well.
yeah, and for what it's worth, I think that kind of came true while he was healthy. He was pacing for better than any of the other guys. And then, yeah, he did get injured, so you can draw your own conclusions there. But I'm not mad at it in the end.
Where do you have him? Have you done like a consensus top 10 or like a first round outlook? Like where do you have Kaprizov in this upcoming draft, just to tease a little bit for the viewers, because I'm sure they'll want to know where that's at. Because I have met an interesting spot.
Okay. No, I haven't done it yet. I have 30 out of 32 teams done my projections for as of this recording. So I usually don't even I don't even try to cross compare based on my projections until I've got everything in. Otherwise I just drive myself nuts. But we have done some mocks and stuff, and usually he's still going really in a similar range, like in this kind of mid to end of the first round. And yeah, I think it is partly the ceiling, right? Like there's not many other players who have 120 point ceiling, and so if you're willing to take on a little bit of injury risk, and probably somebody is in your draft all the time, then he's probably going to go in this range again. And to be honest, like the other guys, I think have maybe taken even more of a hit. Like Rantanen in Dallas, I don't think he's going to get nearly the minutes he ever got in Colorado. He would have to be like a lot more efficient than we've seen him in the past. Maybe that comes true, but again, new coach in Dallas, what does that mean? There's just a lot of moving parts there that give me a little bit of pause about Rantanen. Jack Hughes, obviously multiple shoulder injuries, so that's starting to be a point where if you're injuring the same shoulder over and over again, are you doing something that might actually be long term and might be pretty hard to play through, or might just take away from the ceiling of the player? That's a real question, at least. And then, yeah, we have Matthew Tkachuk, who there's like rumors floating around there from Kyprios that he might not play until like the new year. And I'm like, where are you hearing this information from? I don't know if I should believe this and change everything I'm doing, or yeah, there's just a lot of moving parts in the back end of the first. And so like, would I rather take the bet on Kaprizov just being healthy this one season that I need him to be healthy, or would I rather, take a swing on Rantanen getting the minutes under the new coach actually being okay relative to Pete DeBoer over the last few years in Dallas, and it all kind of working first time for both player and coach? Those are the kinds of questions you're going to have to ask yourself at the end of the first round. I think the back end of the first round is actually a really, really tough place to be this year.
I agree. I think it's actually like nightmare fuel. So,
yeah.
Like outside of, I have a consensus 7, I'll say.
Okay. Yep.
And then it's just like it's fog.
Yeah.
It's like I could go in so many directions. Like my consensus 7 is the order that I currently have them. Okay. McDavid at 1, Mac at 2. In some formats, actually, like Mac has proven over the past 2 seasons he's been more valuable than McDavid. Yeah. But again,
the shots especially, right?
The shots, yeah. But the games played for McDavid have been on the lower end in the past 2 seasons. So like I'm factoring that in. Dry at 3. I've got Cooch 4, Pasta 5. I have Matthews at 6. And then Makar finishes out my top 7. And I think that there's some wiggle room for 5 through 7, but I think top 4 off the board should be McDavid, Mac, Draisaitl, Cooch.
Yeah.
Anything beyond that, like Brandon, who knows? Is he the guy that was slumping towards the end of the last playoff, or was he the guy the first half of the playoff?
Yeah.
Kaprizov, can this guy play more than he played 45 games last year?
Yeah, something like that.
Then you've got Jack Hughes into that same conversation, to your point, what you just referenced. You've got Matthew Tkachuk, who is notorious for being one of the better guys at staying healthy on a regular basis. Normally, I would have Brady in this range as well too, but the fact that his point totals have been like actually terrible
Yeah.
last year, like it scares me a little bit. Like the
Yeah.
shot rate's actually gone down too,
Travis
and
Green
and
effect. Yeah.
yeah, and he provides like a ton of value at the spot just based off the peripherals. But it's like if you're telling me you're drafting a 50 to 60 point player in the first round, like that doesn't actually like sit well with me.
Hmm.
Like think about how many times like you're getting a 3 point night out of Kaprizov and you're just winning your week
Yeah.
versus like Brady's just like a consistent like whatever amount of points over the course of the week. It's like if he's not like having these crazy multi-point power play one nights,
Yeah.
like he just doesn't have that explosive factor. And then you've got like guys like Quinn Hughes, Jack Eichel that are knocking on the door towards the end of the first round. And like I just to your point, I don't know where to go.
Yeah.
There I haven't probably dug into the numbers and the outlook as much as you guys have in the offseason here, but there's a lot of question marks in the latter half of the draft. So
Yeah. Yeah, I think it is almost like the start of a new tier towards the back end of the first, and that extends like well into the second in my
yeah.
mind. And so it is going to be like, yeah, anywhere in the middle of if you're at like the 5, 6 slot, I think you're probably feeling pretty good about life in your drafts this year. Obviously, any year you're picking in the top 3, you're going to be happy, but
Yeah.
yeah, I think this year, maybe more than any other year in the past like 5 years at least that I can remember, I think the back end of the first is going to be a tough spot to sit. So we should get back to the
Yeah,
the
let's
draft that
go
we were
over a
talking
couple of
about.
these picks because I did highlight a couple players and I'd love if you actually rolled the clip, but if
I
production
can't
doesn't
get
want to
it
do
up.
that, that's
Yeah,
fine. Okay.
we'll see if we can get it in post.
All right, so whoever's in post right now can just roll Nate talking about. We'll start with Kyle Connor at pick 4. I think you had some doubts about him, if I remember correctly, just in
Yeah,
terms of like him not projecting well in this format, which seems to be the trend across a lot of these players. But I'm looking at the situation across the board. I'm like, round 4, if I could get like a 40+ goal scorer that's had a history of an elite shot volume, and not only that, but has like a pretty good floor in terms of his point totals. Like, I was just curious in terms of like, what was your issue with that pick? I don't even know if you remember it. I don't know if it's just strictly based off projection. But you ripped him. You're like, yeah, Kyle Connor at the spot. It's hard to press the button. I'm like, what?
yeah, that was obviously a great pick in round 4 last year. You went off. The whole team was super efficient. Power play popped off. Number 1 power play in the league, I think, last year, right? Yeah, 28.9%. Terrific stuff. So yeah, I think they did have some positive variance, but also I did underestimate the player and the situation there. I was a little bit worried about Scott Arniel and what he might do or not do to the players. The Fantasy Puck format in the Content Creators League is a little bit more peripheral heavy, and Connor is obviously not one of those guys, so he kind of has to score 90 plus points to compete with some of the other guys who are just a little bit more peripheral heavy than he is. So yeah, I don't remember who was in my queue at the time or who I specifically would have maybe taken over him. It was probably Matt Boldy or something like that. Who did I take? I took
I would.
Jesper Bratt.
I'd love to be able to
On
see your queue, Nate. Unfortunately, you cover it during
yeah,
your live stream.
I probably intentionally did that.
Oh, for
Yeah, I
sure.
took Jesper Bratt, and maybe I had a higher projection on Jesper Bratt than Kyle Connor at the time, and that's why I felt the way I did. I'll watch it back and I'll get back to you. I
It's
owe you
it's
an answer
funny.
now.
It's funny because you were still gassing Mackenzie Weegar for like a good solid like 20 minutes before like my pick came up and like after the fact as well too. But it was like in that range. It was like Barkov, Ovi, Weegar, Connor, Dobson, Svetch, and then I went back to Wyatt Johnson in round 5.
Hmm.
Caulfield then goes shortly after. So in my opinion, like I'm looking at the names there and I'm like, this is a no-brainer pick. Obviously, hindsight's 2020, but I think my mindset was still the same within that range.
Hmm.
So just curious. But not that Bratt was a bad pick. Obviously, he had a fantastic season. He's progressed significantly as being one of the higher echelon like wingers. You end up getting Zach Werenski round 6, which I want to like just preface how insane of a pick that was for anybody that had him in fantasy last year. Like he was a Norris Trophy caliber defenseman that you were getting well outside of round 5.
Yeah. Yeah, that was a huge one for me. Zach Werenski is a guy that we've been on for multiple years. You can go back and find our projection series and other takes we had on him from previous seasons. Whereas, like, man, if this guy ever had a team to play with, I think he would actually be like a top 5 fantasy defenseman. And turns out it was in Columbus the whole time. We just didn't know it. And he finally has the season. Obviously in round 6, if I had known he was going to have that kind of season, I would have taken him rounds earlier just to make sure I had him.
Yeah,
so
honestly.
there's definitely some element of luck there, but definitely a player profile. And for the league too, right? The blocks weight, the shots weight, 2 things that Werenski does terrifically, and always just betting on the talent of the player. The talent always really showed out for me with Werenski. And I thought, one of these years he will have that pop-off year, and it just so happened to be this year. So that was a big one for me. Came back around to you. You got Sergachev and Keller, back-to-back Utah guys, on 6-7 turn.
Yeah, I think Sergachev was still on the Lightning at that point. I wasn't sure. Maybe he was traded. He was traded at the draft, wasn't he? So he must have been
somewhere around there. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So I'm thinking like along the same lines, like power play 1 defenseman at that point. Like I only have Quinn Hughes. I want to make sure I get a good second D that I can kind of hold on to. Which brings me to my next gripe that I have with you is the man himself, Jake Sanderson. We were super, super high on him, especially with like Ottawa having a really inefficient power play the year before. We were like, the talent that's on this power play 1, it doesn't correlate to what we're actually seeing in terms of the numbers. I end up getting him at round 8, which I think is great value there based off where we projected. Like I said, like we had super high hopes for him, and I think actually in your comments, whoever's in post is gonna loop this in right now. Just thanks Blake in advance. You were like, in order for him to hold his value at this spot, he needs to get like over 55 points.
Yeah.
Which like I didn't have a problem with. Like I don't think that's anything outrageous. Like he was just one of those guys that didn't really show his value until he breaks out, right? And then he comes out and he gets close to 200 shots, 57 points, like a ton of power play points. Like he was one of the better power play point defensemen in the league, which is something that I identified as something that you need to target in this league is power play points. But the thing I like the most about him is he had a pretty good block volume as well. So I'm like, okay, like even at a safe floor of like him being my D3, he has a ton of upside attached to him that we know is untapped. Like he has the capability of playing like a ton of minutes every night, which is something that we factor in a lot of the time with defensemen, is like how often are they on the ice is really what like sets some apart from others, along with being power play 1. And then ends up having a monster season, finishes with 30 power play points, and he just absolutely goes off. So sometimes this kind of goes back to my other point that I've made on multiple occasions. It's like, guys that have this ceiling that are breakout candidates that you're strong and want to like reach on at times, like they pay off, and you should like feel confident in your selection here. But yeah, another one that you just ripped me for that was just completely
unnecessary.
No, yeah. I don't think it was unnecessary because like I do agree with your take. It's like taking him in that spot. It's like you're taking him in the same range as, I can't remember. Let me briefly scan over some other defensemen like Montour, Faber, Erik Karlsson, Seth Jones. You were talking about Darnell Nurse a lot and how he actually holds a ton of value in this format because of, where his peripherals come into play.
Mm-hmm.
And then you see guys like Chikrin and Theodore go the round after, and objectively they had just as good, if not better, seasons, right?
Yeah.
Which brings me to my final gripe that I have with you is the one that I know I'm not getting anything out of you on this because it's a goaltender, but Jeremy Swayman in round 9, I think was insane value. At the time, obviously that didn't end up happening, I think I share a lot of the same sentiment. Not to get too much into what's ahead in terms of questions, but again, this is a value pick for me. It's like I'm getting a starting goaltender that has a ton of volume. There's nobody really like even close to competing for his job in Boston. They're gonna have to, just given like the caliber of their team, play him a ton and have him be dominant to be successful. And it's like I'm looking at like round 9. I don't have a goalie like Skinner's off the board, Bobrovsky, Markstrom, Ullmark. I'm like, okay, round 9, like I know there's a little bit of risk involved just with what happened early on in the start of the season with him like not having the contract, right? Which kind of like offset him later on, and which is why he kind of folded, or at least that's what we speculate. I'm like, this is a guy that could play like 60 games and have like a 9-10, and just because the goalie categories in this league specifically were a little bit heavier than what you typically see, I was like, I want a starting goaltender that I know I can feel confident in, and I look like an absolute clown because Jeremy Swayman was not someone that you could be confident in. So I'll let you have this one, Nate. All right.
Yeah, Swayman. I mean, I actually auto drafted Swayman live on stream in a league. I don't actually know how it happened. Obviously didn't have a queue set, and
That's so
Yahoo
uncharacteristic for you. How
yeah,
did that possibly happen?
yeah, Yahoo just decided Swayman was the next highest player, I guess, and grabbed him when I didn't make my click in time on the clock. But yeah, he was a nightmare, and that's kind of been my point with goaltenders in general. Is like for every goaltender that we're like, oh, this guy's absolutely locked in. He's going to be terrific. Like Jeremy Swayman goes there. Ilya Sorokin went 2 picks later, and both those guys were like pretty awful for at least most of the season, if not all the season. Sorokin kind of came back on the basis of volume later in the year, where he was just literally getting every start for a good chunk of the year at the end. But it's just never been a situation where I'm like, okay, if I can replace 85% of this goaltender with literal waiver wire fodder throughout the season, then that's probably a good use of my waiver wire ads, and I'll take another swing here. Like Shea Theodore went in between Swayman and Sorokin. Like, how much
love
better?
to have that pick,
Right? Like, and obviously, not every pick is going to look that good in the 9th round, and you're still in the range, solidly in the range where you're taking swings on guys. But to me, I would rather have that extra swing in that range rather than take a guy that maybe gives me a false sense of security about the goaltender and be like, oh, I can't drop this guy. He should be terrific, but actually he's kind of hampering you throughout the season. Yeah, I don't think it's like an awful pick to take Jeremy Swayman or any like true volume goaltender in a theoretically good position at the start of the season. I'm not gonna sit here and say that's a terrible pick. It's just not one that I'm making because I am really that confident on the basis of playing. Like even in this league the year prior, I was pretty confident in my ability to find roughly equivalent production, or at least equivalent enough that I would be able to make it up and to use my 9th round pick on another skater. Of course, I used my 9th round pick on Justin Falk, so what do I know? Clearly.
Hey man, there was honestly, like, I'm looking at like the latter half of like round 9 into round 10. Like you've got Raymond here that had a great season. You've got Batherson, who always projects well in leagues with hits. You've got Hagel there, who would have been a league winner, and then the list kind of just goes on. Like even if you look at slightly the round before, like Chikrin was there, like Heischer at the back end. Tavares always plays and projects, and just like the hit shot combo that he still has to this day, along with the point totals that he's putting up, is just fascinating. That he's going still in like round 8, right? And everybody thinks it's like, oh, this is the year where he drops off. Oh, this is the year where he drops off. But yeah, it's this is what I'm saying though. It's like in these rounds, it's like you're never going to be right 100% of the time. It's all about like doing your best to try and find value, and like, and then like guys like Nietzsche will go 2 picks after you in round 10. You're just like, why did I not get that guy? He was on my list,
Yeah, for sure. I think we both kind of hit on some later guys here. We don't have to go totally pick by pick, but like you had JJ Peterka and I had Dylan Gunther in the same round, so we both hit pretty well there. You had Thomas Harley, I had Tyler Toffoli. I had Jake Wallman there. I think I dropped him like before he really took off in San Jose, so I think I kind of botched that one after the fact, but it was good idea in theory. Joseph Wool, I don't remember. It was a little later in the season, right?
I remember my thought process here, and I was like people are gonna, Mike is gonna give me shit for drafting a Leafs player for under any circumstance. But I think my process here was I knew that Swayman wasn't starting the season with Boston, and I was like, I still need goaltenders here at round 13 if Joseph Woll is the true starter, because we didn't know what, we didn't know what Stolarz was. Like he's been a career backup the majority of the time. Like he had a good showing in Florida, but obviously Florida was a powerhouse team. So I'm like, okay, if Woll is the number one starting goaltender in Toronto on a team that's going to win a ton of games, like that's good value around 13. And then I'm like, okay, on the off chance that Swayman doesn't play, on the off chance that Woll gets injured because he does have an injury history or whatever he splits, I was like, this is the year Pyotr Kochetkov, Freddie doesn't stay healthy. Like he's just taking the reins and running with it. And then of course they end up splitting half the time either way. But a lot of my picks here, like again, like rounds 14, like you see Quentin Byfield, you see Patrick Laine, who I think is kind of like a late round, like upside pick only. But I actually really, and then Arturi Lehkonen is just always a guy that I feel like you can rely on that plays top 6 minutes and in a high offense like Colorado. Yep. But I actually really like kind of the latter half of your draft, like the Dylan Guenther pick into like Jake Wallman. I love Boone Jenner too. Like I'm kind of like puzzled a little bit. I think again the injury history scares me off a little bit with a guy like that, but on a per game basis, it's great. And then you take your goalies, you take your Mrazek. Silovs was a great pick, knowing that Demko was going to be out. It was a guy that we were kind of targeting. And then Zach Benson's interesting because like that to me just feels like a shot in the dark a little bit. Like I think
that was just for Buffalo.
It's pretty uncharacteristic for you to take a swing on a guy like that without any type of real rapport. But it's round 17. Like I'm nitpicking at this point, right?
Yeah.
Like.
Yeah, I think that was, if I remember correctly, Buffalo, New Jersey had that like overseas series to start the year.
So it was
probably just whoever pick. I thought.
Oh my god, dude, I hate you. It's like Buffalo actually plays 4 games before everybody else. I'm gonna pick up this random Buffalo player. I'm like,
that's probably what I was going for there.
You're streaming before the waiver wires even open. That's crazy.
That was the plan. I don't think Zach Benson did anything for me, but in theory,
hey,
right?
Man, you never know. But overall, I think they were pretty good drafts. Like, obviously, we were 2 of the top end teams in the league last year, and didn't end up going all the way in the way that I wanted to. Especially now looking at this team, like I was over the moon when I drafted this. I was like, this team's going to be great, and I think for like 70% of my picks, I was good all the way through like round 1 to I'll say round 8, and then you get the Swayman, you get the Lindholm, you get the Byfield, the Laine. It's like a lot of these kind of misses is what kind of categorized the later half of my draft, where it feels like looking at your list up until probably I'd say round 15. Like you could even argue Mrazek and Silovs were good picks at the time, but there wasn't really anything that you missed on, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think that is kind of important. Like, I think that's a good reason why both of us got to the point we did and made the playoffs and advanced. Because, through, you can say 8 picks at least for both of us, we had that solid core established. And beyond that, like, if you go back and look at all of your drafts over the last 5 years, like, think about how many of the players past round 8 or double-digit round picks, wherever you want to set the cutoff. But you go down in that list and see how many of those guys you actually ended up dropping. Like it's more than half usually from the back end of your draft that you end up dropping and moving out at some point in the season. So really, I think it is a lot about getting that floor with the top, wherever you want to set the cutoff, the top 8 picks or something like that. If you can get those guys that are locked in and provide value for you all season long, then that's a huge core that you can build the rest around in season. You can pick up the guys like Raquel, like Kirill Marchenko, whoever it might be that comes up on the waiver wire and absolutely dominates. All right, well, I don't want to keep you the entire night here, so we should probably keep moving on. We talked about this a little bit, but do you watch games or look at stats to form an opinion of a player?
To form an opinion, I always look at stats. I think there is obviously some truth to like watching in game and seeing like, okay, he had like 5 shots tonight, but like 4 of those shots are like well outside the circle and had no chance of scoring. Let's say, I don't know, like Kucherov, for example, had like a hat trick and like 2 of those goals were like empty nets, which you see in like the stat sheet. But at the same time, if you're looking at it just on your fantasy app, like you don't really get to see that. But when it comes to an actual opinion of a player and like a take, for example, whether it's a breakout candidate, whether it's a bounce back candidate, whether it's a, buy low, sell high, whatever, it's like the stats will tell you the story more than like watching a player in real life.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you're preaching to the choir here. I'm looking at stats before anything. I think like nobody has the time to be watching all the games of
Yeah,
all the
that's the other
players
thing.
all the time. Like nobody's doing that so to some great extent you're already in a position where you have to rely on the stats for at least a large number of the players. Maybe your favorite team, you're watching a fair portion of their games, and so maybe there's a chance to develop some takes based on your eyes. Also, I think like we're just not that good at watching hockey. Like just typically not as good as we think we are at evaluating the game of hockey with our eyes. Uh,
True.
I, I, I
Or
just
the game's just not available and it's in a blackout.
Yeah, that is also a very, very constant theme throughout. But like to your point, like people are talking about how great Andrei Svechnikov's playoffs were, right? And he had 8 goals, 12 points in 15 games. That's terrific. 3 of those goals were empty nets, and one of his assists was an empty netter. He had 4 empty net points out of those 12. And
Yeah.
like, yeah, he was out there to get those points, and maybe he will be in the regular season next year as well, and some of those will be there. But like, that's a pretty big chunk of the terrific offseason that everybody's claiming for, or postseason, I should say, for Svechnikov that everybody's claiming. That was empty net production, and that's something that you might not see unless, I mean, you can find that stat, but it's pretty buried. I didn't even know where to look it up. I had to do some Googling here to figure out where to find that. But literally, I went back when I was doing Carolina's projection this year. I went back to try to get an idea of how they were playing Svechnikov and Blake on the power play because I wanted to figure out who might be on that power play next year. And so I found like on YouTube, it's like all of Svechnikov's points in the
Yeah.
playoffs or something
Yeah.
like that, right? And so I watched it and I was like, wait a second, all of these are empty netters, and we're all here saying what a great playoff he had, and yeah, maybe that's true, but also like the actual production also went into an empty net. So there is something to say about that for sure, but I think we kind of just have to, at a baseline, accept that the vast majority of our takes will have to be based on just the stats that we can put on the page.
Yeah, and it's interesting because like you develop biases based off of looking at stats too. Like I think
Sure.
I think Mika Rantanen is one of the more fascinating topics, and I think I would like probably love to do a video on him specifically going into next year and just talk about like his situation because it's so fascinating, right? Like you look at the
Hmm.
playoff points, he's over a point a game, 22 points in 18 games, but then he scored like half of those within the span of like a single series.
Yep.
And it's like, okay, like which Randon am I getting next year? Am I getting the guy that we've always come to know and love as a fantasy stud? Or, am I getting that latter half of the playoff Randon that like just could not find the back of the net and was snake bitten throughout the entire season? Right. And it's like you look at objectively like the point spread, you look at, his distribution of like ice time over the last couple of years, the tendencies that you see, it's like, oh, I'm seeing a lot of downward trends, but then all of a sudden, like he turns around and he looks like an absolute world eater. It's like, which one do I actually believe, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It's definitely something that you have to take into account. When I do my projections, I'm looking at playoff stats more so for like deployment reasons to see who the coach like really trusts. When the chips are down, who's the coach really trusting, both at even strength and power play and stuff like that. But also just to see what was the last time these guys were out. I also do like last 20 games played to see,
Yeah,
in that stretch run when they're going for the playoffs or they're going for the first seed or whatever the case is, who are they leaning on? Who are the guys that the coach really trusted in those situations? I think sometimes that's a good filter as well. Uh, in a Bangers Cats League, what is your approach to roster construction? We probably don't do enough Cats talk on this channel. Most of our leagues are points leagues that we talk about, but I think it is important. You mentioned your main league is a Cats league, so there's goals, assists, power play points as well as its own individual category. Sometimes it sounds like your league is actually pretty peripherals heavy. So you mentioned Brady Kachuk being super valuable in that kind of league, but in terms of building out the roster, what are you thinking about both in draft but also in the season? How are you trying to work through all that with regards to Cats?
yeah. I love cats leagues. I think I think I prefer cats leagues to point leagues. Actually, I think that there's a lot more creativity that you can do in terms of building your teams, especially when you come to like a bangers format, for example. Like you can look at it two ways. You can look at like, oh, I could just build the team based off of hits, blocks, and pims. It's just like a bunch of fuck like beefers, and then
Yeah.
all of a sudden you win out your league because you're capturing like 4 or 5 categories on like head-to-head basis. I think when it comes to my philosophy with categories leagues, like you have to understand, again, it goes back to scarcity, what you can and can't find in the draft. And this is where like you find value. So the recent success that I've had in my league is number one because of the keepers that I have and the way that I've kind of like positioned myself from that perspective. But I also take the philosophy of understanding that like a lot of the times like you can't get scoring off of the waiver wire halfway through the season. Like if you're lacking in scoring categories like goals, assists, power play points, like even to the point where it's like shots and sometimes like these weird categories like blocks, for example, that only relate to defensemen is another big one. It's like, you know, you could spend your entire draft like getting guys that hit and block and just have your defensemen cover those two categories if you have like a sick offensive team. And so there's a lot of ways that you can do it creatively, but I think my perspective and the way that I approach the roster is that I understand that for me to go and pick up a guy that's going to get like 5 hits in a fight off of a waiver wire is a lot more likely than me getting a guy that's going to get 2 power play points.
Yeah.
So I tend to draft more skewed towards scoring, but obviously understanding that it's a categories league, the guys that hit all the categories at once, like the Sveshnikovs, like the Bradys, like the Philip Forsbergs, it's like those guys hold so much more value across the board. Guys like Jacob Trouba, like Radko Gudas, who are like elite in specific categories, they will get you 300 hits. Like Kiefer Sherwood was one of the best players in the league last year because he scored 20 goals, he'd get 1 or 2 shots a game, and then on top of that, you know, like he's just getting you 5 hits a game and he's winning you that category outright for the week. And like JT Miller's another great example of a banger stud, right? So it's like those guys are truly elite in of its sense, and it's like because they do everything across the board. But when you get down to like the nitty gritty, it's understanding that yes, I can get this on the waiver wire, and yes, there's opportunities to get scores on the waiver wire. Like there are guys that don't have a high shot volume that like get you consistent points on a day-to-day basis, like a Jonathan Drouin, for example, that is sitting on like power play 1 that might not be rostered on a team for the majority of the year because he only hits 3 categories. But it's like the tier I would do it is like multi-category machine across like 4+ categories. Then you have your elite players that are like elite in specific categories. Then you've got like your scoring, and then you've got like your beefers at the bottom that like just hit and fight or hit and block. Is kind of the way that I would tier it out.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense for me. The toughest part is trying to do this all live in your draft, right? Like think it through. Okay, Kyle Connor's an example of a player like basically zeros in the hits and blocks, right? So you can take that player, sure, but you also have to be cognizant of what that might do to a future pick where now you're like, I am kind of chasing those hits and blocks just to not, I don't have to win hits and blocks in my draft here, but I also now can't, you can't draft Jack Hughes in the first round, Quinn Hughes in the second round, Kyle Connor in the third round. Like you can't build a team that way and then still expect to contend in hits and blocks unless you're devoting all of your late picks to only those guys, which might be a strategy. But if you don't have any of those guys who fill multiple categories, then it is probably going to be pretty tough to hang at the end of the year, I think. So
see, it's funny, Nate. I guess like that's actually where I've been able to have a lot of success. Okay. Is I individually like look at my opponent's teams, look at where their focus is, understand that a lot of these guys are heavy in like for example, like because it's a keeper league, I can be like my keepers don't scale well in the faceoff category. Let's say I have a ton of wingers, or my keepers don't scale well in the blocks category. But if I have all the categories in front of me and I'm like, I need to win 6 of these categories to win each week, and then I punt like 2 to 3 categories, for example, you find really good value in the drafts. Like I talked about earlier about, these multi-positional like center winger players that exist that take a ton of faceoffs and people are like clawing over to try and get. Yeah. Or it's like, Radko Gudas is going in like the 3rd round in one of these 4, like Jacob Trouba goes in round 2. It's like, I'm still more or less drafting in the same format, but it's like if I don't care about hits or blocks on my team and I'm like, I'm going to own all the scoring categories, I'm going to own shots, and I'm going to own, let's say, 2 out of the 4 goalie categories, and I end up winning weeks 7-5, that'll win you the league.
Yep. Yeah, that is a good point. Especially, I think that's especially relevant the more categories you have, right? The more categories there are, the easier it is to punt one or two or three,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? And especially in specific weeks. And I do think in season, that's a huge point is in these category leagues, you can pre-scout your opponents.
For sure.
In Yahoo, there's like running totals of the total number of goals, total number of assists your teams have scored over the course of the season. And you can pre-scout your opponent based on that and say, okay, this guy, like he's got the most hits and the most blocks in this league by a mile. No one's touched him all year. I'm not gonna stream, another hitter or another guy who gets a bunch of blocks and try to contend with them in these categories that I'm already pretty mid in. I'm
Yeah.
actually just gonna lean into what my team does best, and I can take him down, like you're saying, 7-5 with the categories that I know I can win, and let him have those two categories. Yeah, he's gonna obliterate me in two categories, but at the end of the day, it's about who has the most. So
Exactly.
I do think that makes a lot of sense. All right, another question here. How do you identify players you want to trade for and or trade away? What are you looking at stats wise? What comes to mind for this one?
I think a lot of this has to do with shooting percentage. I think that's the biggest indicator of whether a player is actually relative to his talent level or whether he's overperforming or underperforming. It's not always the case because, again, there are guys that exist like the Braden Points, like the Leon Draisaitl's that have these crazy 20%, 20+% shooting percentages. And then there's also guys that's like, again, if you're not really interested or goals aren't worth a ton in your league and like points as a whole are just worth more, that you're not really interested a lot of the time in terms of shooting percentage. But I think when it comes to identifying players, it's talent and opportunity is kind of like my mindset across the board and my philosophy with how I look to acquire and move out players. It's like everybody knows at this point, or at least the majority of people know and understand how to buy low, sell high on specific players.
Mm-hmm.
But it's the guys that are truly like just don't ever become available that have like these crazy I was all over Miko Rantanen this year. I was all over Austin Matthews this year.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, go out and trade for these guys because these are like first, second round caliber play. They're both first round caliber players. Just before anybody yells at me in the comments, but, like these are like elite level players that are almost never available to like even think about acquiring
Mm-hmm.
because they're struggling so much, because they're not holding their value, because people get frustrated in fantasy hockey, and whether it's week 2 or whether it's week 14, it's like all of a sudden you pull up their game log and you're like, this guy's not doing anything for me.
Mm-hmm.
It's the name value that can get me something in return. And that's the other thing you need to like. I'm looking for like opportunity of players, whether they're overperforming, underperforming, more than I'm actually looking at, who actually helps my team here.
Mm-hmm.
The only time where I start to really strategize in terms of like, okay, like schedule for playoffs is kind of like towards the trade deadline.
Yep.
And just as a note, like the more higher level you play in fantasy leagues, the more difficult it is to make trades.
Yeah.
Like I found that especially in our FPPL league this year. Like I was in our Division 2 out of like our 4 divisions that we have, Division 1 obviously being the highest. There weren't a lot of trades that happened. There's like almost next to no trades that happen in our creators league.
Yep.
And it's because guys are so like just aware of whether a player is overperforming, underperforming. And it's hard to like, even when you like skew heavy in a draft, for example, and you have like 4 or 5 defensemen, it's like guys are so scared of making the wrong decision a lot of the time that it doesn't open up a lot of opportunity for trades. So it goes back to my earlier conversation. It's understanding scarcity. It's understanding player evaluation as to who's valuable in your league. It's understanding buy low, sell high. But in terms of like identifying players, it's like if I know that this guy is available and I know that this guy, for whatever reason, isn't happy with his performance overall. I think Tage Thompson has been a hot topic in that regard as well. It's like, you anticipate a guy to be a 45, 50 goal scorer. He doesn't look like that in the first half of the season. People kind of label him for what he is, and then you're able to like get him on the latter half, and he ends up like producing well above like what he showed in the beginning.
Yep.
So it's really talent, I think, is the way I would kind of summarize all of that.
Yeah. Yeah. I think shooting percentage, huge piece of it. At Apples and Ginos, we often talk about what we've coined the luck metrics. It's maybe a bit of a misnomer, but shooting percentage, also on ice shooting percentage. So the amount of shots that are going in just when they're on the ice, not necessarily their shots, but also their teammates' shots when they're on the ice. and then IPP, or the individual points percentage, so their share of the offense, their share of the goals being scored when they're on the ice. And usually I'm just looking at that, how they're performing on the year, and kind of looking at that relative to their career, right? What they've shown their level is in these stats. Because usually it's actually pretty tight. If you look at the vast majority of players over the course of their career, it's pretty tight in shooting percentage, it's pretty tight in IPP, it's pretty tight in on ice shooting percentage, unless there's some big change that you can kind of point the finger to. New coach midseason, yeah, some things are probably going to change here, that obviously can have an effect. But if nothing has really changed, if they're still shooting at the same rate, everything else looks the same, and the only thing that's different, the only reason they're not performing is because their shooting percentage is way lower, and that's the only thing that you can see about their kind of statistical profile, if you will, that is different, then that's a pretty clear sign for a buy low. And I think people kind of gather that, but I think if there are multiple levels to that, there's the shooting percentage, there's the on ice shooting percentage, and there's the IPP, and all three together can really give you a good indication of what a player should theoretically be capable of, and what they've done so far. And a lot of times you can find some value that way. And obviously, in terms of trade away, you get the reverse situation, right? High shooting percentage, high IPP, high on ice shooting percentage, and that can kind of give you an indication in the reverse direction. All right. One more question from my side here. What's your view of what I've coined the 0G draft strategy? You can do whatever you need to here, Chris. Get it off your chest.
No, honestly, like I think the philosophy is sound. I think a lot of us here at Fantasy Puck actually adopt a very similar philosophy, to the sense where I don't think a lot of us go completely 0G, but it's definitely like understanding that goalies are the most volatile position in this sport. It's the most variance that you see across, I would say, like 90% of them on a year-to-year basis. To your point, there's guys that you think are just like untouchable and immune to this, and then next season it's like, Shesterkin has like an 880 going into like fantasy hockey playoffs, and you're just like, I want to shoot myself because I drafted this guy in the third round. So like there are a lot of elements that I agree with. I don't have a problem. It really depends, in my opinion, on your league settings. I don't think that it's a good idea to completely punt a position. Like, there's a reason why like the 0D strategy doesn't exist. There's a reason why the 0F strategy doesn't exist, right? It's like you need good players at every position to be successful. Can you get away with streaming a goalie every week and winning your league? Yes, absolutely. That is a strategy that I think people have come to realize earlier on. I think my philosophy skews a little bit less. I'd say I'm about like 80% in that regard, to the point where it's like I'm looking for value in goaltending at a certain range. And I've seen a lot of success by, getting guys like Darcy Kemper, picking up guys like Mackenzie Blackwood, right? Like getting guys that, hit in these kind of like late rounds that are still starting goaltenders that we look to target because of how much better they can perform based off of their ADP. I don't think I've ever gone full 0G. Maybe I'll do it in the Creators League this year, and you'll like catch on to it halfway through. Chris is listening to me. He just wants to like prove a point here or something. But I think I'm aligned with your philosophy. I just don't think I scale fully 100% all gas, no brakes 0G.
Yeah, that's fair. I have kind of, to some extent, you can never define a strategy like that, right? Like the basic premise is that goaltenders I view as the most replaceable and the least predictable of any of the picks that you're going to make in your draft. So why would I devote high-end draft capital to that position? And for me, with the success that I've found through the waiver wire, through super late round picks, I've just kind of I've just almost been doing it just to see how much I can get away with, like pushing it as far as I possibly can. But
you're
definitely,
just kind of memeing at this point.
Yeah,
like,
a little bit, yeah. But definitely, I don't think like it's against the spirit of 0G or whatever you want to say to like draft somebody double-digit rounds. You're taking Darcy Kemper most of the time last year. Like, to me, that's still 0G. We're just trying to reduce the impact of bad goalie picks more than anything else, right? Especially when we know that like there's a pretty good chance that I'm gonna have a shot at Mackenzie Blackwood, especially if if I do have those notifications on, and I know that I have a pretty good shot at being the first guy to the wire to pick that guy up. So that's kind of where I've landed on it for myself. There's obviously different formats, like you mentioned. There's different things about different leagues. We do best ball leagues too, right? Where you just draft the team and then you don't touch it for the rest of the year. Like you can't predict the 0G
Yeah.
goalies that are going to emerge in the waiver wire throughout the season in a league like that. You got to just take your guys who you think are going to be starters from day one all the way through. So that's obviously a different format. League settings wise, I think like I'm doing it in the content creators league where I'm fading these goalies pretty late. In some of the point setups that I'm more used to, the goalie weights are a little bit less, but I'm doing the same strategy in both places. And to me, like the goalie weight doesn't really change the predictability of the goalies or the replaceability of the goalies. It just changes the impact of the goalies. And so, yeah, I'll have more variance in the way that I'm playing it, but that can also be positive variance, right? It can really mean that I'm actually obliterating people now if I do hit on that Blackwood on the
Yeah.
wire or whatever the case may
Yeah.
be.
So there's like a little bit of room for leeway in that sense.
Yeah, it's a
Yeah.
little bit of a double-edged sword, I think, in that regard too. So that's where I've landed on it, and different people have different takes on that. But I think it's holding up pretty well at a pretty high level of competition. So I'm going to keep doing it for myself, and everybody else can do as they see fit. All right, Chris, last one here. Any questions for me? Anything that you want to pick my brain about? Anything that you need to get off your chest? I feel like you've gotten some stuff off your chest
Oh yeah,
already
no,
here,
this was a good first interaction between us. Like we
for
had
sure.
some interesting discussion all the way through. I love talking philosophy and draft strategy. It's one of the most fun things about fantasy hockey in general. But I've always been curious about a lot of your takes, and so this is why I kind of pressed you on a couple of these players, and you've been a good sport about it, thankfully. So
No worries.
I've really enjoyed it. I think we'll end off on a fun one for me,
All right.
and get a little bit specific into actually like fantasy hockey looking towards the future for this year. Give me like a one of each. Give me like a breakout candidate that you're super excited about. Give me a sleeper that is kind of a little bit. I'd say like almost like a deeper league sleeper that you're excited. And then just because of the class that's coming into this year, give me your favorite like rookie that you're actually looking to target in this upcoming fantasy hockey season.
All right. So yeah,
Start wherever you want.
yeah,
It's a loaded question.
yeah. There's a few names coming to mind for sure. I'm thinking about a value guy that I'm pretty big on this year's Troy Terry in Anaheim. I think that uh, I've said it a lot, but the situation in Anaheim the last number of years has just been so bad. And digging into what Troy Terry does, I think he's done a pretty admirable job in a pretty terrible situation. He was saddled with Ryan Strome for like the whole of last season, and Frank Vetrano. Vetrano's like good for fantasy, but I'm
Yeah.
not like convinced he's good for like
He's not a
actually.
I wouldn't call him a talented forward. Yeah.
Right. And those were basically Terry's line mates all of last year. While, the other fun players, McTavish and Carlson and these guys were all playing with each other. Terry was left with those two guys who are probably fourth liners on a lot of other teams in the league. So I think Terry could have a really big bounce back. I think Quenville probably represents maybe the biggest coaching upgrade of the offseason, just from one coach to the next. And Terry would probably, in my mind, be the player to benefit the most from that. I'm also huge on Cutter Gauthier, who's a bit of a even
He's on
later
our
round
list.
sleeper. Yeah. Yeah, his minutes like kept getting decreased towards the end of last year, and he kept scoring more and more. It was like almost like he was spiting the coach, like as you decrease my minutes, I'm gonna score more.
Yeah.
So I'm really high on just the coach effect there and what it might look like for them to get some offensive freedom for once. Like nobody's expecting Anaheim to be good. There's some pretty obvious like Columbus Blue Jackets from this past season parallels in my mind where like they escaped the coach that was doing all the wrong things. They get a coach who just lets them play hockey, and look at that, they're actually pretty good at it. So I think those are two guys especially from Anaheim that could really pop off in the right situation here. For a rookie, There are a few defenders that are really catching my eye this year. Zane Perek and Steve Bouillon. I think both have really big potential opportunities in front of them. To me, in Calgary, there's been talk about moving Rasmus Anderson. I don't know why you would even consider that unless you think that Zane Perek, as another right-handed D, is capable of taking top 4 minutes as soon as this season. Calgary, obviously, they were in the playoff hunt last year. They obviously have playoff aspirations again this year. I don't know why they'd move off of a good defenseman like Anderson unless they're actually actively trying to clear room for a guy like Perek, who I think they view as a potential star on their back end, who has performed like a star at the OHL level multiple seasons, shoots a lot, scores a lot. Yeah, I think he could have a massive season if given the reins in Calgary. I don't know that that happens, but it's definitely a huge upside player that I want to be in on. And Buim, kind of similar, but obviously different situation. Jonas Brodin looks like he's going to miss some time to start the season, so there might be a top 4 spot for Z Buim off the rip here. Brock Faber, Jared Spurgeon were both abjectly terrible on the power play last year, and so it makes all the sense in the world to me, at least from the outside looking in, that Z Buim goes straight on power play 1. And if he's given that, like, you're talking about a guy who went into the NCAA and immediately posted back-to-back point per game seasons as a defenseman, as a teenager against some pretty grown-ass men in the NCAA, and now he's going to come to the NHL, and I think he's going to thrive right away. And I think Minnesota as a whole, especially if Kaprizov can stay healthy, right, that would be a huge key for sure. But I think there's definitely 50-plus point upside for Buim if he takes the reins right from day one and runs with it. So 2 for 1 at the end there.
Love it. I think we're aligned on a lot of those. I think one guy that I'm really excited to just watch play hockey is Perek. I don't know, like, if fantasy hockey defensemen, especially rookies, are very, like, I'm always really hesitant on rookies as a whole because I think they get a lot of hype just talent-wise coming into the season. And, whether it's them getting injured halfway through the year or them not being in a good position with, like, a team around them, they really kind of, don't always pan out. Mm-hmm. I'm excited for a guy like Alexander Nikishin, on Carolina, simply because of, like, I think there's an opportunity for him to just step into a power play 1 role on a really strong team that just added Nikolai Ehlers. Mm-hmm. And not only that, but I think there's going to be a big potential for some peripheral stats that I don't think a lot of people are prepared for that. But to your point, there's a ton, like, I'm super high on Buim as well. Like, especially like that I would say that category of power play is in a tier that's a lot higher than, say, what Calgary is with Perek. Mm-hmm. Do I think Perek individually could be better just based off a fantasy perspective? Like, if let's say this guy's like Roman Josi year 1 and just starts firing the puck at will, it's like that's going to pay dividends for you, even though the power play is not as efficient. But I think Buim as a whole is in a better environment, and that team is a team that does desperately need a power play 1 defenseman. Mm-hmm. So I'm excited for a lot of the defensemen, but I'll just throw one just for the sake of timeout in terms of, like, a rookie that's kind of recently flown onto my radar that's not Nikishin, is Isaac Howard. Mm-hmm. And the thought of him playing top 6 minutes at Edmonton, like, there are dollar signs appearing in my eyes if you look closer. There's, like, regardless of what he is as a rookie, will not actually matter. And this is kind of the scale that a lot of the time, like, I'm thinking as I'm doing my rookie video for the year, it's like, okay, where do I put players that have just an insane opportunity versus a guy that I think is, like, infinitely more talented and will be a better player eventually. And for Howard, it's just simply the opportunity. Regardless of it, like, this is just him playing top 6 minutes. If he touches power play 1 for whatever reason, like, it's like lights out at his value that you could potentially get him. And I think he's, like, just such a kind of touch and go name that people have kind of heard of, just the fact that he's been traded to Edmonton. But as soon as people start seeing him in the top 6, in line rushes, in preseason, they're going to lose their mind, just like they do every single year, like Victor Arvidsson or Jeff Skinner, or, it's like that's just a name that I think is going to get really popular really quickly, that I'm excited to see what they kind of do with him, especially as a rookie, because I do think the reason why they acquired him in the first place was because they felt he is ready to play NHL minutes.
Yep.
but it's this is the thing with rookies. Like it's like I have this excitement about this player, but at the same time, it's like this guy is very easily going to crash and burn. And I saw the same. I was very much. I wasn't. I would say off, but I wasn't as high on guys like Arvidsson and Skinner last year as some of the other people in the FP community. But just the fact that this could easily crash and burn, and they end up playing third line and they just do absolutely nothing, and you just happen to pick the wrong guy in the top six. It's like I think a lot of the time that happens with rookies, and you need to kind of level set. So I'd say I'm more excited about the potential defensemen that are coming in this class, just because there's so many options. Like we haven't even talked about Matthew Schaefer.
Yeah. Or Ivan Demidov up front.
Definitely. There's another great name. Like the Calder race this year is going to be sick. I'm super excited.
Yeah, it's going to be great for sure. Yeah, I think that is kind of what you get with rookies, right? There's a lot of upside. There's the unknown downside. They could just not cut it for whatever reason their first year playing 82 games at the NHL level. But that's why they're late round picks, and that's why they're fun to take a swing on later in the draft. All right, Chris. Well, this was awesome. Thanks for giving us so much of your time here. Why don't you go ahead, let the people know where they can find you, where they can find everything you got coming from Fantasy Puck this year.
Yeah. Well, always appreciate being on here. Love doing some of these long former stuff with you guys. It's not something that we really do over at Fantasy Puck, so I appreciate the fact that I get a little bit of a different kind of content itch that I get to scratch here with you guys, and always love, you guys are great, so love being on the show. You can find us at Fantasy Puck across all socials, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok as well too. We're going to be going super heavy into our short form content. That's kind of something that we're kind of skewing towards. But Fantasy Puck is available on pretty much every social media, as well as check out our website too. It's just Fantasy Puck on Patreon, and fantasypuck.net is where you can find everything that you want about our brand. We did the extra effort and got a website that's all nice and shiny for you guys. So check that out. It'll have our Patreon, all of our social media on it. It's fantasypuck.net. So go be sure to check that out. And we'll have a ton of content coming for you. Like content season's always busy for us. A video every single day all the way through from pretty much like late August till season starts. So look forward to that if you guys are interested in some more Fantasy Puck content.
Awesome. All right. Well, that is going to be all that we've got for this episode. So hopefully it brought you some value, helped you get a little bit better at fantasy hockey today. All the advanced stats you heard me talk about today came from Natural Stat Trick, terrific free resource. Many thanks to the band there for supplying music for the podcast. Be sure to check out their Spotify as well. And that's it, folks. Much love.